What's up, guys, and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. In my extensive use of and research into Grooveboxes and other self-contained standalone music production stations, I've come across a bit of a trend that I've noticed that I want to talk about that pertains both to your buying decisions of Grooveboxes now and where I think the Groovebox kind of industry or niche might be going in the future. Essentially, I've noticed that modern-day Grooveboxes kind of fall into 4 different categories, and these are defined both by price and by capabilities. And all of this is subject to change going forward, and I'm going to talk about that as well, because I think we're seeing maybe a little bit of shifting in the categories. That's been a long time coming, but regardless, let's jump into kind of the 4 levels of Grooveboxes and compare some capabilities as well as prices. Starting off with what I'm going to call cheap. This is something that's kind of around the $100 mark, something that is probably quite small and compact and fun to use but somewhat limited. You might get it for a beginner, you might get it if you're a beginner yourself, or you might get it as a secondary way to make music portably or just a way to tinker with a cool gadget. Some easy examples that come to mind are things like the Teenage Engineering Pocket Operators, especially stuff like the KO, which is a bit more of a fully featured Groovebox, or things like the Korg Volca sample. These things are cool devices meant to be tinkered with, meant to be small and portable, and they're fun, but they're also somewhat limited. You're probably not going to be making a full song easily with them, and it's probably not going to come out as polished, and you kind of have to embrace the limitations with them to get something out of them. And I am not saying that you can't make full songs with them. I've seen many people do it, and I've done it myself, but you're definitely going to have to go out of your way to do it, and you might find yourself hitting limitations fairly quickly. I'm not going to go so far as to say these things are toys, because I'm hesitant to call any pro audio gear toys, because I've heard it thrown around a lot, and I think people say it without really thinking through what that even means. So I'm just going to say they are limited gear and often better for entry-level stuff or just some tinkering. You're probably going to get more mileage out of them as part of a larger setup. And if you want to make something completely self-contained without hitting limitations too quickly, you're probably going to want to move up into the next level, which I'm calling the budget Groovebox. And in my personal opinion, this is kind of the minimum viable production station, where you can put in not a ton of money and get a lot more out of it than you would expect, and make entire songs with kind of the minimum number of layers you need and the minimum sound quality that you would need for a properly polished song. Obviously, this is incredibly subjective, but I'm thinking in terms of something that would be dropped in a club or get some radio or Spotify playlist airplay. Budget is also a subjective term, depending on your age and your income. So for the purposes of this video, I'm capping this category at $500. So this is going to include stuff like the Roland MC101 at the higher end of that, and then stuff like the Korg Electribe 2s, the Electron model cycles and samples, and of course, the Novation circuits. Devices like this are great for beginners because they often are a bit more intuitive, often don't have so many features buried within them that they're going to be too intimidating to learn. They've got enough layers to make something that sounds full, but not much more than that, and they can often sound quite polished, especially with more modern, versatile stuff like the Novation circuit or especially the Roland MC101. This is where my channel has really thrived for the past few years, and I have a really special place in my heart for devices like this, and don't see myself ever forsaking them even as I can get more expensive gear. They're easy to recommend because of their relative intuitiveness and relatively low price, yet there's quite a bit of room for producers to grow into them, and if you are patient with them, you can get a ton out of them, as hopefully I've been able to show. I've been using these devices extensively and gotten quite a bit of music out of them. Albums worth. So this is a category that a lot of us are going to be living in, and rightfully so. Another thing I should mention is size. Typically, going from the cheap category to the budget category, you go up in size, but the devices are typically still pretty small. You can easily fit them in a backpack and travel with them, and the same can't always be said for the stuff moving forward, although it depends on the device, and I'll get back to that in a second. The other thing I want to mention about this category is that it's changing. It kind of re-emerged into the wider music production community consciousness over the past few years, and has been getting stronger and stronger as the devices get more and more powerful and are now kind of trying to outdo each other. And I'm noticing something here that Mark has Brownlee noted in some of his videos about budget smartphones. Namely, stuff in the budget category is getting good, and the prices are slowly going up to reflect that. You've seen this with the Roland MC101 kind of being the cap of this category for me, and the new circuits are going up in price from what the original was. The tracks, fortunately, is not a whole lot more, and I don't think we have numbers for the rhythm yet. And both of these promise to give quite a bit more in terms of power. So budget music production devices are getting very good, and as a result are actually getting a little less budget, but still affordable for a decent amount of people, and might end up kind of being their own category, if that makes sense. I'm kind of wondering if we're going to see in the Groovebox world what you have seen in the smartphone world, where the budget stuff gets more expensive and becomes flagship stuff, and so companies kind of loop back around to make budget stuff to fill in that gap. So maybe we will see like a Circuit Lite eventually. That might be good. That might offer some more choice to people and more flexibility depending on what they can or are willing to spend. We'll see. While you can absolutely stop here, some people do want to upgrade to stuff with a bit more power, maybe some more layers, maybe some more sound design or sampling capabilities right on the unit itself, and maybe allow for some more inputs or even a bit more size. And for that, you're probably going to move into my third category, kind of expensive. And this is stuff that's probably going to be the peak for a lot of us in terms of what we're willing to put into, for a lot of us, a hobby. I'm capping this at $1,000, but I'm imagining stuff more in like the $700 mark. So stuff like the Roland VerseLab MV1, the MPC1, and the Roland MC707, the Akai Force, and the Synthstrom Deluge at the very upper end of that. These represent a pretty big jump from the budget category. You get a lot more layers and a lot more control. Often these are seen as much more professional devices, and some people will see this as the minimum viable production station and everything below it as being a toy. I think that is a mistake, but I'll probably make a dedicated video about that at some point to rant about that further. What I'll say right now is that these definitely do represent a significant upgrade in terms of power and ability to do stuff, frankly. If you really want to get the most out of a hands-on, DAW-less sampling or sound design experience, you're probably going to be going with one of the devices I just listed and accepting a bit less portability in return. These typically do get a bit bigger, which does make sense, although there are absolutely exceptions. One obvious one is the OPZ, which actually goes out of its way to get smaller, which I think is neat. I should also mention that this is the category that's gone the most overlooked by me in the past, and I'm working on changing that. I started this channel quite a while ago when I was a teenager. I'm 23 now, and as the channel has grown, I've grown up and been able to earn more money, both from my actual job and from this channel being kind of a proper side hustle at this point. And I've got some money to reinvest back into more expensive gear, and I've got some partnerships with companies that allow me to try new stuff out, which is really cool, and I'm definitely working on taking more advantage of that as time permits. Expect to see a lot more of this, but so far I've lived a lot in the budget category and honestly thrived there. I have a lot of love for that category and don't intend on abandoning it, even as I try to make this category a bit more of a staple on the channel, but that's going to happen slowly, so please be patient with me. There are a couple of major exceptions on this channel so far. One is from way back a few years ago. I got an OP1. This was before the price gouging and then before Teenage Engineering jacked the price up themselves. So when I got it, it was definitely in the kind of expensive, like mid category, and now it's moved to the fourth category, which is expensive. Like, that's pricey. The other exception is much more recent, and that is my use of the Machine Plus. Also, over $1,000. In the case of the OP1, I'm never going to sell it at this point because it's a bit of a modern day classic and probably a bit of a niche boutique item at this point. And the Machine Plus I had on loan, and I'm going to be sending it back soon after having made videos about it and tried out a bunch of its features. And what I've noticed in this category is that while you definitely get what you pay for, like you get a premium experience at a premium price, you really have to like the ecosystem of the expensive thing to have it be worth it for you. For instance, for the Machine Plus, I would say it's mostly for people who already really love the Native Instruments ecosystem and want to get into it without having to connect to a computer. If you care less about the Native Instruments ecosystem, it's probably worth going with something else that's less expensive because in effect you are paying the Native Instruments tax. The same goes for the OP1. It's got a very unique workflow that's unlike anything else I've ever used. It's got some really weird synth and effects engines that are also kind of different from how stuff would normally be expected to operate. It's got a hands-on nature that feels different than any other hands-on workflow that I've experienced, and it's just very teenage engineering in every way, down to the way that it's built and its design. And if you really like the teenage engineering design aesthetic and the sound that people get out of it, then it might be worth to you to pay the teenage engineering tax, essentially. But for a lot of people, it's probably not worth it, and it's worth getting something a little more conventional and a little less expensive. Once again, you are paying for a very unique experience, and whether or not that's worth it to you will depend on whether or not you consider that a bug or a feature. And that's obviously going to depend on the person. For instance, for the OP1, I wouldn't buy it again now at its current price, but I'm really glad I bought it at its previous price. So my priorities have shifted depending on how it's priced and depending on the experience that I want out of it. And to be honest, I don't use it nearly as much as I probably should. I've gravitated to more kind of MIDI sequency stuff like the Circuit or the MC101. Another thing I should mention about really expensive Grooveboxes is that they tend to have a lot of inputs, or function more like self-contained little studios in general, and the OP1 and the Machine Plus both absolutely have this. However, you are starting to see this happen a lot more in the kind of mid-expensive category as well, so that's not necessarily unique to this category. The properly expensive category is one that I've enjoyed spending some time in, but I would only spend time in it if I didn't actually have to pay for it myself, and that's been the case so far, and I can't necessarily see myself feeling comfortable dropping Machine Plus money on a Machine Plus when there's so much other stuff out there, just for my own personal music making process and for the sake of recommending stuff on this channel. So that's the state of the Groovebox niche right now as I see it. And I think, once again, you're going to see stuff in the budget category continue to get better and better, and the line between the budget and the mid to expensive categories continue to get blurred. We're also starting to see a further proliferation of really small, compact stuff. Like there's a really little tracker that I've seen some stuff for that I would love to get my hands on at some point. There's stuff like the Artiphon Orba, and overall just companies trying some really kind of unique, wacky stuff to cram as much power into a tiny device as possible. This is a really great time to be getting into DAW-less music production, especially if you like minimalist, compact setups, and I can't wait to see where this stuff goes in the future. And also for my own personal interests and for the direction of the channel, I would love to start using more kind of mid to kind of expensive Grooveboxes. But once again, trying multiple devices is just going to take some time, and I'm going to have to be patient, and hopefully you'll be patient with me as I go through this journey with you. So that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you've got any additional thoughts, be sure to leave them in the comments below. And if you'd like to see some related videos, you can click or tap up over here somewhere. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit. Peace.